The children of grade 12, 2023. A welcome to the mentors, to the teachers, to the parents, the children of our school, and the rest of our community, to this very prestigious occasion, a seminal night in the life of our pupils. This is something that we know people have been working towards, been looking up to, waiting their turn. It is a very, very special evening, and it's a great joy to be able to share it all with you tonight, as we have been denied this opportunity in the past. But as we begin to feel our sense of community and growing capacity to be in each other's company and feel the spirit and the life of the school, we go into this particular celebration with a sense of thanks for being able to host such a thing. And to continue that thanks, I would like to thank, in particular, our facilities manager, Mr. Lester Twig, and his team for having set up this room. I'd like to thank Mr. Nick Shaw for organizing and sorting out the sound equipment and the tech stuff that he does so well. Thank you, Mr. Shaw. I would like to thank Yvonne Herring for these beautiful bouquet arrangements that we see beside us. I would like to thank David over here for doing the filming. Thank you. And on that note, I request that you take out your telephones right now and switch them onto silent. I would like to ask that you do not film or take photos during this presentation. As I said, it will be masterfully recorded here by our film man, David. I would also like to thank our main sponsor, ESCOM, who's given us 2 or 3 hours of no electricity from 8 o'clock. But like these children, we are prepared. Got things lined up, inverters, generators, cables, whatnots. Not to say it's all going to go perfect, but we are prepared. And that is certainly my central theme for tonight. And that the grade 12 projects is one long journey for our grade 12 children in preparation for something. They are not entirely sure what it is when they start, but it's about being prepared. And over and above, the ongoing work that they do in the classroom with regard to their subject lessons and their main lessons, they have to attend to this lingering commitment around the grade 12 projects, and it looms huge on the horizon for our children. But it is this aspect about being prepared for life that one learns in an exercise like this, truly being prepared, how to delve deep into something and create a project of significance, of depth and of meaning. This is the best gift we can give our children. Over and above, as I said, the academic achievements, what we hope our children leave our school with is being able to go into life and handle or encounter whatever comes their way. And this is possibly the greatest building block in that direction. And being prepared in life is like having a superpower, but it's not invisibility or being able to fly. It's just plain common sense. And anybody of an age will tell you that. I wish I had been prepared. So as we wait for these pupils to show us the incredible work that they've done, I know a number of you are sitting there right now thinking, I wonder what I would have done if I had the opportunity to do a grade 12 project. It's not too late. Without further ado, I think we need to press ahead. We've got a lot of people to speak. We've been quite firm about the time limits, and so far this group has honored everything that we have asked of them. We're going to begin with blue, and we're going to go straight into it.
Everyone, is this on? It's working. Okay. Hi. Sorry, that was very awkward. I would just like to say how absolutely ecstatic I am that I am the first one to be presenting on stage. As you've probably all heard, it has been one heck of a long journey since the beginning of the year, and since we even started this process by actually just thinking about what we're going to do. And I just want to say that I'm very proud of our whole class for really just getting this far and putting it all together at the last stage. So from there, that kind of leads me into my project. You're probably wondering what the heck I'm doing on stage dressed as a giant fluffy dragon. Now, to fully explain that, I'm going to need to go back a few thousand years to really get into the actual work of it. So, my name is Jamie Bixby. Minor problems. So, my name is Jamie Bluesable. I am from class 12, and today I will be sharing with you my passion that I have been working on way before this project, since I was a little kid. So, to start off with, the word anthropomorphism is a Greek term referring to when you apply human characteristics to an animal. This has been seen all throughout history with things like Egyptian gods, like Anubis. They often have the heads of animals and other animal aspects, and lots of old carvings from the Stone Age where humans were often seen having animal heads. Some of these date as far back as 35,000 years ago. And today in our society we can still see that this is very prevalent, with things like dogs being seen as loyal animals, foxes are sly, and cats are often lazy. So that leads me into the furry fandom as a whole. So what is a furry? Well, this is an identity-based term that refers to people who enjoy or take part in the anthropomorphic community. They can enjoy movies, video games like Zootopia, Pokemon, and this can form itself as a small hobby, as in drawing art or reading comics, or it can be a wider part of their life, being personal and social. So this then brings me to the idea. Come clip the event quickly. Is it not? Okay. So this brings me to the idea of fursuits. So what the heck is a fursuit? Yet more weird terms. So this is essentially your animal character, which is an extension of yourself, in the form of a wearable costume that you may wear to conventions, hanging out with friends, or just to take photos. So when I was a kid and I first joined the fandom, I really wanted one of these awesome fursuits, because who wouldn't want to dress up as a giant fluffy animal? I mean, it was just so cool, but it turns out they are really, really, really expensive. And as a 12-year-old, I didn't really have 30,000 Rand lying around. So I decided I would end up making one. And this comes to my first horrible creation. I don't even think you can call it a fursuit. However, it was my first. I remember following a YouTube tutorial and using old couch foam to make it out of. And the ears are actually held together with toothpicks. I hated it. I wanted this thing out of my house. But my parents were so chuffed with what I'd made with my own hands, they said, come on, give it another try, let's see what you got. So that brings me to my second one, which is a bit better, I must say. I ended up selling it at a student fair. And after that, I found that I actually really had a passion for what I did. And this had become a core aspect of my personality and as a maker. So this then takes me to my Instagram account. I started my furry Instagram account around 2019, and this is where I made all of my fursuits. You can see I definitely progressed a few years on. I began collecting a lot of customers, a lot of orders, and I would sell them mostly overseas to Americans because they have a much better currency than we do. And I ended up making quite a lot of profit off of it. And the most I have ever sold a head for was this green one over here, which went for about $700 US, which equals to about 13,000 rand. So I became quite happy that I'd actually found a hobby that I was very talented at, enjoyed, and it made me money. So that was a plus, especially since materials are incredibly expensive and you can't find any in South Africa, unfortunately. Now, unfortunately, being in the fandom comes with a lot of downsides. These downsides include bullying and hate, and because of this, it has made the fandom a lot stronger as a community. Now, the reason this bullying and hate exists is because back in the day when the conventions first started in the 1970s, they were mainly adult-orientated, and this included adults dressing up in animal costumes and participating in adult acts. Now, a lot of people find this very weird. I find it weird. Everyone finds it weird. That's how it is. But the main aspect to think is that these are consenting adults doing consenting adult things. They just happen to be in animal costumes. So a lot of people kind of only know about the fandom for that weird side. Now, every fandom has a weird side, that's how it is, and the furry fandom just happens to have a very weird one. But it is not the main aspect of it, and it's actually quite a small part of the community, and there are tons of other people like me who just enjoy it as a hobby and dressing up as an animal. So this brings me as a kid, when I was at school and I first said, oh, I'm a furry. I received death threats online, I was bullied relentlessly at school, my friend group dropped me out, which made my childhood quite lonely. However, I built an empire and now I earn more money than they will ever have in their entire lives. Just to end off this segment, what I would like to say is that it is a hobby, it is a form of expression, and it means a lot to a lot of people around the world. And to be so hateful against that, you're not a good person. I mean, let people enjoy things. It's just people having fun, really. Okay, so now this brings me to my project. There's your long-winded history. So, for my project, I decided I wanted to push myself and make something that I have never done before, which is a full costume. Up until now, I have only made heads, paws and feet and tails, and because my business is so wide-reaching, I wanted to be able to go the whole extra mile. So, to make it even harder, I wanted to add electricity to it, and I have never touched a wire in my life. So I decided that for the animal that I'd be doing is a protogen, which is a fictional animal species designed in the fandom, which is half robotic, half animal, and I figured this would be absolutely perfect for my project. So I ended up starting with the head, which is on the floor, unfortunately. This is made up of LED light panels and a Raspberry Pi matrix that shows the expression on it, which is then covered by a visor so that you don't see all the wires on the inside. I ended up furring the rest of the head, connecting all my wires, and I ended up with a finished product. After that, I went on to, there's the head. I went on to the paws. So these are also quite basic, cut and sew with a pattern. I decided to put some fairy lights in to add for a cool glowing effect. When I first plugged in the lights, I used a 9-volt battery and they literally exploded in my face. And I have never been more scared in my life. I thought I was going to start a house fire. So I had to rewire that and use double A's, which ended up working perfectly. And now I have some really cool rave light-up oars. Now we go on to the feet and the legs. So that's these bad boys over here. These were quite easy to make as well. Once again, that is a foam base covered in fur to create the whole leg shape. Then my armor, which is the chest piece and the legs, which was originally meant to be black, but the paint started peeling, so I put fur on them as a last-minute fix. I think it looks quite nice anyway. There is the ceiling with polyfoam and then painting it black and then eventually hating the look of it. And that is essentially the whole process of this project. Now, I have had to condense this speech a lot so that we don't sit here for hours and hours while I speak. But I would be absolutely delighted if you would come and talk to me and ask me more about this, because there is so much more that I can say and so much that I've had to leave out. And once again, I would just like to say thank you all for being here. It really is so cool to show off this thing that I've been working on for years and years. And thank you to my friends and my family for supporting me and always driving me to the fabric store because I forgot to buy a zipper. Thank you, everyone. Really appreciate it.
Hello everybody, my name is Gabriel, and for my class 12 project, I did a scooter revamp. So at first, when I first heard about this project, I wanted to do a motorbike remodel. So I wanted to buy an old motorbike and remodel it into a cafe racer. But as time passed me by, I realized that this wasn't possible, as I still hadn't gotten a motorbike at the end of the first term. And so my uncle came up to me and told me that he'd found a scooter for me. And so this swayed me into choosing a scooter, but we didn't end up buying that scooter. And we only ended up buying a scooter at the end of the first week of holidays. But as soon as I got it, I started working on it. Initially though, I didn't really know what to do, so I just started taking off all the body panels, which were in really bad shape, from the previous owner managing to drive it into a fridge. And I don't know how that happened. But I took them all off, got the frame out, took the engine out of the frame, strung the frame up, and gave it a nice coat of paint. Once that was done and dry, took it back to the shed, put the engine back in, and started tackling the wires. This was pretty easy. I just needed to strip them and reconnect them up to some places. And I've taken pictures of the previous when I've taken it apart. Always do that. So that was pretty easy. Once that was done and I checked it if it was all working with the battery, it was time to get the bike starting. And so this was it didn't take that long, but there was just stuff that happened afterwards. But so after a lot of fiddling around, Mr. Fox, my grandpa and I, we figured out that the fuel pump wasn't pumping fuel into the carburetor. And so that's the easy fix. We just went and got a new fuel pump. And once we got that, connected it up, checked that it was working perfectly, tried to give it a whirl, and it still wasn't starting. So with a bit more fiddling around, figured out that the throttle was too far open, making it so that the butterfly valve, it's a valve that allows air into the carburetor, was too far open, disallowing the combustion process. And so that was also another easy fix. We just made the cable longer. After that was done, gave it a whirl, and lo and behold, it started perfectly. So now that it was starting, we needed the body panels. Who knew that this would have taken the longest out of everything else? So after ordering them, arriving, and then getting mixed up, some of them getting sent to PE, I don't know how that happened. I got them all back to mine, and just to make sure, I gave the scooter another whirl to see if it was starting. Boom, and it floods. Classic, you know. So it turned out it was actually quite an easy fix. I took it to my grandpa, who assured me that it was quite easy to fix it. Just needed to be cleaned out. So we took it all apart, cleaned it up, gave it a spray, and put it back together, and yippee, it started. And so now it was time to put the body panels on. So I did that. It took quite quick to do that. And then it was all done. I took it out onto the road, pressed start, didn't start. And so that was also another easy fix. Didn't have petrol in it. So we went out and got some more petrol, put it in, and lo and behold, it started. So I gave it a whirl, got it up the road, drove it up the road, and then floods again. So I don't know how that happened. So now I had to take it apart again, take everything apart again, look at it again. Turns out I bent the housing space of the needle valve a bit too far. Needle valve is okay, never mind. So yeah, we blew that out and cleaned it, and I bent it back and worked fine. So now I've got my scooter. I still don't have some of my body panels though. And yeah, I mean, from this project, I mean, I've learned quite a bit. You know, I've learned a lot of patience with myself, and I've learned to accept that other people, if they're not directly related to your circumstances or somehow related, that they lack a sense of urgency. You know. So yeah, I also learned that procrastination just really isn't it. It's something to work on later on. Yeah, I mean, that's pretty much all it for me. I'd really like to say thank you to my friends and family, Mr. Shaw and Mr. Fox. They really guided me through it, gave me reassurance. And my family, thank you so much. You guys mean the world to me. Thank you, guys.
Hi everyone. Yeah, since I was young, I can remember myself looking up into this night sky and just imagining I was an astronaut floating in space up there. I've always had an interest in space, and I've always wanted to be able to replicate what the space industry does, even if on a smaller scale and quite a lot more simply. This is what led me to choosing my project. My name is Sean Hodges, and I want to share with you my experience in building and launching a rocket. The first step was to research rockets, how they work, and what I would need to actually make one, such as the materials I would use, and what I would need to do. I started to read a few books and articles to get a general idea, so I knew that this was the right thing for me. I built it out of mainly a cardboard body tube and plywood fins. So I, as well as other people, when I told them this, were very skeptical because cardboard and plywood do not ring the bell as rocket materials. But luckily, the reason this was possible is because they are lightweight materials. And this meant that they were light and easy to get off the ground compared to something like stainless steel, which is incredibly heavy, although durable. So I had to find the balance between something strong enough to not break on takeoff and light enough to get off the ground. This process came with an unexpected amount of sanding, remeasuring, and messy glue just about everywhere. So, the main parts of the rocket that are viewable from the outside are the nose cone, the body tube, the fins, the motor or engine, and the motor mount tube. Parts that are not visible from the outside include the shock cord, the parachute, and the piston. Now that I knew I wanted to make a rocket, I would need to find out what parts I would need and come up with a design so that I knew what I would be following while I was building it. My initial designs were not very good and were lacking in a lot of what was necessary to actually make them work. Because I needed to get my rocket back in one piece once it had been flown, I would need to add a parachute. The reason I needed this was so I could retrieve my rocket and so that it didn't become an unguided missile falling from the sky. Now, because the parachute is packed into the body tube, I would need to actually get it out of the body tube in order for it to actually function as a parachute. For this, I needed an ejection charge. An ejection charge is a powder which, when ignited, burns up and pressurizes the body tube that it is placed in. My nose cone is fixed onto the body tube by use of a shoulder and held in by friction. That way, once the pressure from the igniter will push the nose cone off and pull out the parachute and shock board with it. The rocket, and in order to ignite this ejection charge, I will need electronics. I use an altimeter, which read the ambient air pressure around the rocket and was able to ignite this ejection charge at apogee, which is the highest altitude. Now, the rocket would work by first being ignited, and once this motor is depleted and the rocket reaches apogee, the altimeter would ignite the ejection charge, which would pressurize behind the piston, pushing it out, pushing off my nose cone, which would pull them all out, and the parachute would hopefully inflate and descend safely back to Earth. Now, in order to power this rocket, I would need a rocket engine. For most amateur rockets, the best choice is a solid rocket engine, which is different to the liquid engines that are used in rockets from, for instance, SpaceX. They use a liquid propellant and oxidizer. For a solid rocket engine, this is mixed together into a solid propellant. The hole in the middle of the propellant is the combustion chamber, which when ignited produces exhaust gas at high temperature and pressure, which accelerates as it exits the nozzle. Liftoff occurs once the thrust is greater than the gravitational force, and the amount of thrust produced is all dependent on the amount of fuel burned and how quickly it escapes out of the rocket engine. You know, it's just rocket science. I will now try to give a more simplified and condensed version of the building process for my rocket, so that hopefully I do not bore you all in a very lengthy and tedious process. So, I started the rocket by sanding the fins and fin slots so that they had a perfect fit with each other. Once that was done, I put in the motor mount tube where the motor would be, or the engine, and then I started to glue on the fins using a jig so that their fins were on straight. Otherwise, if they were skew, it could cause my rocket to become unstable and ending it not very nicely. After that, it was time to finally start on my electronics bay. Now, the problem with this was that my original design did not have an accessible electronics bay that I could actually access. So, I had to design an entire new rocket, basically, and which would allow me to actually access my electronics bay so I could arm it and make changes to it if something did go wrong at all. The way I did this was I cut my body tube in half, used a coupler where I placed my electronics bay inside of, and put them all back together and secured it with screws. Now, once I had finished the main rocket, I decided it was time for a ground test to see if my recovery system would function as expected. Luckily, that means it did work perfectly as expected, and that a vacuum was used so that the altimeter would detect a change in air pressure, which would ignite my ejection charge. I was very nervous in what I had built up to this point, and luckily this brought me a newfound feeling of confidence in what I had built, because I feel a lot of the time I didn't exactly know what I was doing. So, at this point, I thought it was finally time to turn my naked, unappealing rocket into something more rocket-like, with the use of white and red, so this rocket would go as fast as possible. Now that the rocket was complete, it was time for me to get a guide rail and launch controller so that I could safely launch my rocket without being directly next to it. The purpose of the guide rail is so that the rocket is pointed in the right direction for the first bit of flight, and so that the fins can start working properly, as fins are less effective at low speeds and require airflow over them to produce the forces in order for the rocket to stabilize. Again, it's simple rocket science. I borrowed the guide rail from someone, but I very quickly realized that this guide rail swayed, and this could cause something called rod whip to occur, which, when my rocket would leave the guide rail, could cause it to flip and go directly into the ground, which would end my launch very quickly. So, I very stupidly realized this the day before my launch. So, I had to urgently try to construct a new guide rail in the day before. But luckily, after a few hours and many hands being helped with me, that sounds terrible, we had constructed a new guide rail just in time. On the early hours of a Saturday morning, I drove up to Malmesbury and anxiously set up my rocket ready for its launch. I've got 2 videos to just show you how it went. I also thought I was nervous when this was happening and it wasn't going anywhere for the first bit. It reached a peak altitude of 311 meters. The launch was practically perfect and it came down smoothly and landed just about right next to where I had sent it off. It was such an amazing process, and I've learned so many valuable skills and lessons from this. I maybe even hope one day to be able to pursue this as a career in the future. Not model rockets, but the aerospace industry. This couldn't have been possible without the support from my family, emotionally and financially. And I would also like to thank Lex Marnevecker, who I kept on needing help with my rocket very urgently, very many times. And also a thank you to my mentor Lulu, Gerard and the UCT Space Society. Without everyone's help, this wouldn't have been possible. Thank you.
Good evening, my name is Akira, and for my project I wrote a collection of short stories titled Splinters. A while ago, probably last year, a friend of mine, Jacob, asked me if I had anything which I could be proud of. It was said with some malice, but it did stick with me, and going into this project, I knew I wanted to do something I could be proud of. Something fully my own work. Something that I could bring into the world and be happy with and feel like I've added my own perspective. I wanted to make something people could appreciate and even care about. I've always loved words, and writing a book is something I've thought of doing many times, and being a writer was a childhood dream of mine. I'm much more pragmatic now, but that impulse has somewhat remained, and it seemed like a worthwhile challenge to prove to myself I could really write a book. I had the idea to write short stories quite early on. With short stories, I could explore various different ideas and create a collection of those ideas. There are three main things you have to focus on when writing a short story. The first is to make sure that you have something which you've thought of, and then you need to turn it into a story. It could be a moment, an idea, a dream, anything. From there, you have to write it out and give it the semblance of a plot, or no plot if you don't want a plot. And then you have to think of an ending. The ending of a short story should be sharp and memorable. It can't be drawn out or sensationalized. That would take the wind out of the story's pages, which would be very bad. That is obviously the general formula to write a short story, but none of that happened very fast. Often the first sentence would take a week, and the plot would shrivel, die, and I'd have to start again. In fact, I spent the first 2 months writing like 5,000 words, which I had to scrap. I also didn't know if I was going to write fiction or not. First, I decided it was all to be fiction. My original project proposal read something along the lines of a collection of short stories, all fiction, elements of horror and surrealism. That didn't pan out, and I realized it was much better to write about things you know and actually care about. I think it's better not to try to explain any stories, because it's like explaining a joke, and you just shouldn't do it. It took me many months and many different locations, my bed, a couch, a cupboard in Japan, a loft on a mountain, to write all my stories, but eventually I did, with a lot of help from my mentor, Kubas, throughout the whole process. Then I had to get everything in one folder and lay it out correctly. This was actually a very tedious and difficult process, but I won't go into it in detail, but just know you should never try to write a book in Google Docs. I didn't really think I was going to learn that much during this process, and I did it more just to see if I really could. But it really surprised me just how much my writing improved during this time. My pacing improved, my dialogue improved, but the main thing was just how I approached writing a story. In the beginning, I was adamantly against the idea of drafting, but by the end, it was an essential part of my process. I realized that a story doesn't just need to begin and then you write it until it somehow ends. It's actually a good idea to have an idea about where you're going. Just writing down the plot of a story in a simplified way can give you so much more room to let it develop. If you don't need to think about what could possibly come next, you can just write and then improve it as you go. And if you happen to have a better idea during the process, which you undoubtedly will, you can just implement it as you see fit. It also doesn't even necessarily need to be written beginning to end. Well, the skeleton should be written in that order, but then you can move things around and change things from wherever. It's like a painting, it's a whole piece. This might seem obvious, but I didn't realize that for quite a while. Even taking all this into consideration, I think my biggest shift in perspective was how I viewed this country when it came to storytelling. The first story I wrote, which I scrapped, was not set in a familiar environment, which is why I think it failed. Writing about things you know is much better. When I found myself in Japan for the holidays, I was sure I would write a story set in Japan, but I didn't, and I didn't even attempt one. And when I landed back in Cape Town, I realized just how happy I was to be back, and I realized how much value there can really be in the familiar. This really helped my writing a lot, because I was suddenly enthusiastic about the place that all my stories would undoubtedly be set in. There are 10 stories in my collection. They're all quite short. The longest might take 8 or so minutes to read. They are all written in different styles, some more drastically different than others, and they come together as a whole body of work on the basis of each story's emphasis on nature and the overarching theme of uncontrollable change. I'm going to read the first paragraph of the 4th story, titled Millie. Although not much plot is given in this paragraph, I think it gives a good feel for my writing and sets a scene for a few of the stories quite well. After school, we'd edge around the beehives and make our way up the hill. We'd eat wild asparagus and pick flowers for our mothers who walked home. Our bare feet calloused against the thorns and sticks that covered the forest soil. We would pick the knobwoods knobs and build tree houses in the lemonwoods. In the sizzling winter, we'd find piles of dried grass stacked on the slopes that bounced like trampolines. And we'd come home as the sun was setting for a wood fire bath. On summer's evenings, the mist would roll in. It snagged in tree canopies and glazed the blushing sunset. We'd huddle with lemon verbena tea in the candlelight, as thunder howled and lightning lit up the navy gray sky. We'd dash to the bedroom and lie awake, listening to the steady pattering of rain against our corrugated roofs. At night you could hear the harpies, letting out blood-curdling screams, like orphan children of the forest. I just want to thank everyone who helped me in this project. There were a lot of people, but mainly my internal mentor, Mrs. Mousley, my external mentor, Kubas, who isn't here tonight, and my mom, who is here tonight. Thank you so much.
Wow, I can't believe after almost 15 years of being at this school, it's finally my turn to stand in front of you and present my Class 12 project. Good evening, everyone. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Gabriel Wilcox, and for my Class 12 project, I chose knife making. I chose this project for a few reasons. Firstly, when it came to January, I hadn't really given my project much thought. And to be completely honest, it hadn't really hit me that I had to choose a project by the 20th. Roughly a week before we went back to school, I finally decided to take this project stuff seriously. I sat in my kitchen and wrote about 20 project options, projects ranging from ice hockey to yoga, all the way to figure skating. As you might be able to see, I don't think I'm quite built for figure skating. Since around grade 5, I always said to myself that I'm either going to do ice hockey or build a robot for my project. But at this point in time, my mind was set on the idea of ice hockey. My family had many reservations, and to be fair, they did bring up some valid points. They advised me not to do anything sport-related due to the amount of sport I do already. And at first, I was irritated and felt like I didn't have a say in a project that is all about the self. And since I had to do this over the next 8 months, I wanted to choose the project. So, I re-looked at my list again and focused on what would really represent me. I found myself thinking about my childhood and how I always had a knife with me. So, even though I was irritated at first, I'm so grateful that they pushed me to do something that wasn't a sport, because I have a new hobby and passion and plan to start a small side business where I can sell all the products I make with all the freedom I want. So to my family, thank you. Once I decided to do knife making, I said to myself that I'm going to make at least 5 knives. Little did I know how much time and effort each one requires. I set out a few goals that I wanted to achieve through this process. Number 1, I wanted to learn a new skill and as many different ways of making a knife as possible. And number 2, I wanted to focus without getting distracted. Throughout my life, I've always struggled to focus. The only thing I've ever given complete focus to is my exercise. But with this project, I wanted to discipline myself to not let the little things distract me. That is why this goal was so important to me. My project's name is GMW Knife Works. I chose this as my project title because if I'm going to be making knives in the future, I need to put a logo either by acid etching or laser engraving it onto each knife to show it as my brand. I've always liked the way my initials have looked next to each other, so this felt like the perfect opportunity. And once I finished designing it with the help of my internal mental markers, I was ecstatic and instantly knew that nothing better would follow. This project threw many obstacles at me, mainly finding mentors. I struggled at first to find a mentor. After contacting many people, I found Rick Afonso, one of the heads of the Cape Town Knife Guild. Unfortunately, at the time, he was too busy to assist me, so he asked some of the other guild members if they were available. Thankfully, a man named Grant Thorburn said he could help me. I felt so happy, everything was finally on track, and I was so excited to begin. Unfortunately, that excitement didn't last too long because Grant's work abruptly sent him to Joburg, leaving me with 1 knife and no mentor. After another 2 months of emailing roughly 30 to 40 people, I hadn't received any positive responses, which really demotivated me. And at this point, I was needing to decide if I should switch projects. I was considering yoga, but then I thought that I should re-message Rick Afonso, the man who helped me find Grant originally. He was now able to assist me, and I was so happy that I could stay with knife making because, yes again, I can't picture myself doing yoga either. This is the first and only knife I made with Grant, and it is my Warthog Hunter knife. The first time I went to Grant's house, we went straight to his workshop and planned the knife I was going to make. After planning, he showed me how to use the grinder, the same exact machine I built myself and is sitting on my stand. It was an intimidating machine at first, I won't lie, designed for cutting through hardened steel. So I asked him, what is the best way to not lose a hand? Grant looked me dead in the eyes and said, just don't let your hand touch it. With those encouraging words, the small grin formed in his face. This was one of my favorite moments from my project. The knife was made out of N690 stainless steel, and for the handle I used a piece of African blackwood. And this is a short video on the process. I didn't think it would be so quiet. Each knife took me probably about 50 to 80 hours to finish, so it was a lot of my time and energy. after Grant left, I started going to Rick's workshop, where I made 2 other knives to completion and 3 others that I'm still busy with. The first was a chef's knife, which was made out of N690 stainless steel. This knife is a narrow tang knife. Narrow tang basically means you hollow out the slot, like this, and then you slide the blade into the slot and glue it so it's held in place. And a full tang is where you leave the spine of the steel visible and then glue 2 individual pieces of handle material onto each side. This is a short video of what I did, and for the handle I used a piece of dyed maple burl with a piece of G10 on the top. G10 is a material similar to carbon fiber, and maple burl is a wood that's usually found at the bottom of a tree, almost like a growth, that is then put into a stabilizing chamber with specific fluids and dye, and then the wood just absorbs it. And this is just a quick video on how the chef's knife came to be. Each time I started a new project, I wanted to incorporate a new element and use a different process to make the knife. With Rick, I made the chef's knife. I also started to make a small paring knife, which was also made out of N690 steel. And I also forged a cleaver out of 80 CRV2 carbon steel. This is a quick video of the forging process. Even though I finished this project, I can't wait to finish all the knives I didn't have time to finish and see how they turn out. The last knife I made was a Niels Pretorius Model H. This knife was designed by a famous South African knife maker, and I nicknamed it my pride and joy because it took so long. So this is the finished product. This is a rendition, actually, of a famous American knife maker who was well known for the template at the bottom. But the blade at the top is the blade I made. And this is the knife I based my project book on, a how-to guide to knife making. It took me 52 different steps to complete this knife, but I will quickly show you 7 key steps I did in order to achieve this blade. Step 1. After I marked the steel using the template, I ground it to shape on the grinder. Step 2. I drilled all the pinholes. This is a very quick run through because we all have other things to do as well. Step 3. I had to heat treat the steel to 1040 degrees in order for it to harden. Once the temperature rose, I left it in the furnace, the image on the left, for 15 minutes. And after the 15 minutes, the steel will develop a certain fire scale to the surface, making it look black, like the second picture. And then you will have to sand it until it returns back to a silver color. Step 4. I had to set up a jig in order to grind evenly because you have to be very precise with knife making. So I just used a G-clamp with a piece of wood that was right angled to support it, and then I ground from a 60 grit belt, which cuts the steel, all the way up to a 600 grit belt, which more polishes than cuts. Step 5. Here I drilled into the guard material and then filed it up I filed it with needle files until the knife slotted in perfectly. This is a quick video of the sliding process. This was the most satisfying feeling of my whole project, I won't even lie. Gets me every time. Step 6. I glued on each piece of handle material using an epoxy using a quick setting epoxy, and after the glue dried, I used hand files to shape the handle. And step 7, the final step, after the handle was shaped, I made a sheath for it, and after I hand stitched it, I dyed it black, and then the knife was done. about a month ago, I cleaned out my shed with the help of one of my good mates. The picture on the left is all the stuff that somehow managed to fit into this picture, and this is the space I will use. Funny story, my parents went out that day and said I could put some of the stuff inside. This was when I made the executive decision to put most of it inside and deal with the consequences. A few hours later, after I dumped everything into the dining room, my parents walked in and their jaws dropped with shock. But to be honest, I felt pretty smug because they said I could put some, they just didn't think about the volume of it. Because the process of knife making involved using dangerous machines, I learned how to take my time, slow down, be meticulous, be careful, concentrate, and be present. Most of these findings were things I didn't really excel at before my project. And without these lessons, this might have been the project of Tommy Two Fingers or something like that. After reflecting on all the things I achieved in this time, I realized that I actually did a lot. I wrote a how-to guide to knife making. I completed the build on a grinder. I started setting up a workshop, and I learned how to keep my mind sharp, no pun intended. Before I get to thank yous, I just want to say that this whole process was one of the best things I've done in my life, and I wouldn't change a thing. And now, the few people that I want to thank. I want to thank my godmother who helped me reorder my speech because it was pretty shocking, let's be real. And then I also want to thank my internal mentor, Marcus, who helped guided me throughout most of this process and helped me with anything I asked for help with and kept me on track. And to my family, who all objected to me doing this, I see you. I do appreciate you because you did put me on a different path, which was nice but also irritating. And I want to mainly thank the drivers, my mom and dad, who drove me all the way to Fisher from Claremont multiple times a week, even though they do have actual jobs. So to my family, I love you all. Thank you. Last thing, I kind of took a bit too long of a pause there. This project wouldn't have been possible without my mentors, and to the one of them who is here, Grant, thank you from the bottom of my heart. I appreciate everything you did for me and sacrificed your time for free, which was the best part. So thank you, I appreciate it.
Hi, I'm Zoe from Sale, and this is my grade 12 project. I wanted to do my project on something to do with biology, but it took me a while to figure out how I could include this because anytime someone asked me what I thought I'd want to do, my immediate response was math, something to do with math. I didn't want to give up on this apparent lifelong manifestation, so I thought of something that included both aspects of what I wanted to do, which was seemingly harder than I thought it would be. My project is a mix of AI and biology, to put it plainly. I have taken microscopic images of cells, human, animal, and plant, and essentially fed it into an image merger AI that has taken multiple images and interpolated them to create one outcome. Biological hallucination is the title of my project, and dynamic biological interpolation is my subtitle, and I think this probably deserves some explanation. The definition of dynamic is a process or system characterized by constant change, activity, or progress, and the definition of interpolation is the insertion of something of a different nature into something else. And I think this describes perfectly what I'm about to show you. This is an interpolation of many biological images that I have collected and then ordered. They have been used to generate frame-by-frame connections between each image. As you can observe, it finds a similarity between images and then generates multiple images in between, smooth enough to look like a video, to create a living effect, a movement that flows. Each cell, as different as they are, all have a similarity, something that connects them. And this is what the AI finds and uses. The images you are observing are entirely unique. They are new. They have been generated by an algorithm that used real-world living cells to produce them as they move from one state to another. Our bodies are made up of things you cannot see with the naked eye, very complex and rather beautiful things. Our cells are constantly evolving and changing so that we can evolve and change. From the moment we are born and long before it, our bodies have been working very hard to keep us alive. And all this work goes unseen by us. And I guess that's what made me so interested in it, the fact that it's such a mystery what goes on in our bodies. I wanted to know
how it works, and what exactly happens. Each part of our body has a defined job, and I wanted to see these different parts up close. Associate Professor in the Department of Human Biology and head of the microscopy core facility, Dirk Lang, showed me how to use the Zeiss LSM 880, which is an inverted confocal laser scanning microscope with AeroScan. A confocal laser scanning microscope is a specialized type of microscope that uses a laser light source to more accurately examine the cells. Each laser is a different color, and depending on which laser you shine, it will show you a different part of the cell. AeroScan is a higher resolution scanning technique to get better quality images. For the blue fluorescence, to see the nuclei, the ultraviolet laser is used. For the green fluorescence, to see the cytoskeleton, a blue laser is used. And for the red fluorescence, to see the mitochondria, a green laser is used. Professor Dirk Lang introduced me to Mr. Ashwin Isaacs, who is a histologist. A histologist is someone who studies the microscopic structure of tissues. I was able to cut tissue from a rat brain on the cryostat, which is this big machine that cuts tissue into very fine slices that you can put it on a slide. The whole unit is temperature controlled so that the tissue doesn't melt. After I cut the tissue and put it on the slide, this whole process is slightly painful as you have to make sure that it doesn't fold or scrunch up. Color staining was next. And this involves the slides being dipped into different chemicals so that they can get stained. Sadly, our first dip didn't go so well as the tissue washed off the slide and was gone. Luckily, there was more rat brains cut up and we could make more slides. And this time we used a coated slide so that the tissue had more to bond to. The process of dyeing involves a lot of different dips. 3 minutes in tap water, 3 minutes in hematoxylin, 3 minutes in tap water again, 3 minutes in Scott's water, which is a bluing agent, tap water again, and then 30 seconds of Cassin. This is done to enhance the contrast in a normally colorless tissue slide. I was also able to look at different cells. One of them was a cancer cell. What was incredible about this is that the different parts that were lit up were so visible, and you could see how they layered up to become one image. I also had the ability to look at how they make 3D images. The tissue is cut slightly thicker, and more images are taken going down the slide, and then compiled into one image that can be viewed around and seen from all sides. This was not the only microscope that I had access to. Kerry Gordon works at Watchmaker Genomics, a company that creates enzymes for scientists, mostly molecular biologists, to use in their research, as well as making enzymes for companies that do DNA testing, so sequencing DNA. She is the designer and developer of the manufacturing process of the products produced, and had a microscope that I could use. She ordered pre-prepared slides for us to look at and take photos of, such as the eye, spinal cord, and kidney. You can also look at these slides at my stand. You can swap them out on the microscope. We also had the chance to look at cell division. The way that cells change, grow, and develop is part of what drew me in. And in a similar yet completely different way, computers too have developed. From the very first computer that filled the room to the laptops that we can carry around with us today, the technology has advanced at an incredibly fast pace, and one of these advancements is AI. AI has the ability for a machine to learn and then respond intelligently. It can learn in two ways: by using lots of data or by using an algorithm with no data. In deep learning, there are generative model and discriminative model types. Generative models take an input from a data source, goes through an encoding process, uses the latent space to find patterns, decodes it, and produces an answer that was similar to the input: text, sound, image, voice. Discriminative models identify an object. Take a picture of a cat, for example. It can tell you whether it is a picture of a cat or whether it's not a cat. My project is based on a generative model and uses Stable Diffusion. Stable Diffusion is a class of deep learning models called diffusion models. They are generative models, meaning they're designed to generate new data similar to what they've seen in training. In the case of Stable Diffusion, the data is images. In my case, biological images. It operates by iteratively applying a process to the image. At each iteration, the algorithm computes the diffusion coefficient based on the local image characteristics, such as gradients and edges. Multiple biological images were used for this process. The coefficient determines the strength and direction of the diffusion, allowing the algorithm to adapt and adjust the smoothing effect across an image, as you saw in the video. There's a video that should play. It's fine. As you saw in the video. Another aspect is backpropagation, which is a method used in artificial intelligence and deep learning to calculate the gradient and the edges, and helps to update the neural network. When we randomly feed an input through a neural network, it guesses the output. Then it compares the predicted output with the actual output, measuring the error using a loss function. To optimize the weights and improve the prediction on the next round, it requires knowing how much each error contributed. That's where backpropagation comes in. It works backwards from the output layer through the hidden layers, all the way to the input layer, calculating the error gradient at each step. Dr. Jay Sale, my dad, mentored me throughout the whole coding process and assisted me throughout the AI concepts, and is the reason I know what most of these fancy terms actually mean. I started looking for a base code on GitHub, which is an open source developer platform. Initially it didn't go too well, as all the code was text to image and text to video. I was looking for image to image. Though after some searching, I found what I was looking for. Code that took multiple images and made one. Now the problem started. To run the code, I needed CUDA, which is a computing platform and programming model developed by NVIDIA for general computing on graphical processing units, GPUs. A GPU enables matrix math to be done efficiently. Each image is essentially a vector of numbers represented in the matrix. I didn't have any NVIDIA devices, so the code wouldn't run. I tried swapping it over to CPUs, but it quickly became apparent that having a GPU was a dependency and not something that could be changed. There were quite a few other changes that were made on PyCharm and then pushed onto GitHub so that it would update fully. Lambda Labs saved me at this point. They are a cloud GPU company, which meant that I could remotely connect to them. This was all very exciting because it meant that my code would actually run. But getting the code up became quite a process. The plan was to use PyCharm, but I couldn't connect to a GPU through that, so I ended up using my terminal. The first step was to create an instance on Lambda Labs, which is getting an SSH key to be able to connect to a GPU in California. After this was done and I had connected, it was installing the requirements text, which was all the dependencies and extra things that were needed to get the code running. Then to connect to the main code, and it's up. What was really useful about this is that it gave me a link and I could actually do the merging on the web, which made the user interface much nicer, as I could add images and edit the different strengths of the AI. Merging the images was an interesting experience because I was never really sure what the outcome would be. Obviously, as I did more, I was able to tell how the different strengths worked. The more colorful the image was, the better the merge was. Though it was hard to make sure that the red in the images didn't overpower the rest of the colors. The CFG scale was one of the main factors in controlling this. The lower the number was, the more detailed, color detail as well, the image was. Creating the video was quite a challenge, because the base code that I found could only take 6 images as an input and had a minimum frame rate of 15 seconds, which meant that the output video was about 0.01 seconds long, which was not what I was looking for. We were able to edit this code quite drastically. so that you could input a file path name and it would create a video on the frame rate that you gave it. There is quite a bit missing from this story. Most of it the frustration of things not working in the code and the fact that almost everything had to run more than once. Lots of little errors that in hindsight were fairly easy to fix, but at the time took me ages to find. A lot of the errors were eventually identified by Jay in a matter of seconds after I'd been looking at it for hours. This project would not have been able to happen without my dad. He helped me every step of the way with the coding and was patient, kind of, with me when I didn't understand a concept. Thank you so much for being so invested and helpful. Another big thank you to Professor Dirk Lang, who is the reason these images came out so beautifully. It was incredible to be able to see the cells under the microscope and learn how everything worked. Thank you to Mr. Ashwin Isaacs, who walked me through the whole process of cutting and color staining your own slides. And thank you to Kerry Gordon, who was so interested in my project and helped me get the slides to look at. Thank you to my internal mentor, Mr. Shaw, and to my family, who supported me throughout the whole process and helped me stay on track. Thank you, Mum. So thank you for your constant love, support, and understanding. To a close, is to emerge from a cocoon or chrysalis, renewed or changed. I am Jupiter Thompson, and I have created Eclosion, a short animated film. Simply put, the film is about personal change, growth, and learning, mainly through connecting with nature. It is about the balance of nature, how beautiful and caring it can be, and also how dangerous and unforgiving it can be. It is about how us humans are nature, even though we consistently disconnect ourselves from it and view ourselves as separate. The beginning of the film shows the peace and happiness felt in nature, and the end shows how unknown and chaotic it can be. So throughout high school, when I would think about what I wanted to do or create for the infamous grade 12 project, I originally thought of doing something out of my comfort zone, something active like diving in the ocean or even gardening. This isn't really active. But the idea of telling a story with my art and creating an animation dominated my brain. Originally, I thought of creating a film based on my many crazy, fantastic dreams, but this idea fell through after I, unsurprisingly, didn't commit to my dream journal. So last year, in 2022, my art and happiness became very centered around nature. At the beginning of that year, I found myself in a very depressed and anxious mental state that I felt completely trapped in. It was all-consuming and affected me, my family, and my school life very negatively, and by the end of the second term, I knew I had to make a change within myself. In those July holidays, we went on a trip up the East Coast to the Transkei, and we first stayed in a magical rural seaside town called Mdumbi. After 2 weeks there, swimming in the warm water that was teeming with life at that time of year, basking in the warm winter sun, and surrounded by plants and animals, I finally began to feel like myself again. After that, we hiked down the coast for 5 days. After that, we hiked down the coast for 5 days, and the whole experience gave me the energy to successfully keep going with the year and enjoy my life again. During the second half of that year, 7 of my friends and I wrote a song for a different school project. The song was called Soil and followed all of the previous nature themes that I mentioned. My friends Michael, Baz, and I sang the song many times, and I really loved the message and feeling of it. So from this song, my Transkei experience, and my general art being centered around adventuring through nature, telling stories, organic shapes, and relationships with myself and others, I decided to create a film based off these themes, with the song Soil as the background. No one will ever understand just how difficult and tedious animation is until they properly immerse themselves in the process. I used Procreate on my iPad to animate my film, which is a digital drawing program with a basic animation setting. I decided to use it because it is very intuitive and straightforward to use, and I felt that I didn't have the time to learn a complex program and create a film. But of course, with the simplicity came restrictions, and most of my entire film is frame-by-frame animation with the help of duplication. For example, I drew a face, duplicated the image, and changed the eyelids slightly every time to make them blink. And that's just a simple movement. This method takes very long. In total, I spent 165 hours creating 2.5 minutes of animation. I worked at an average of 10 frames per second and created 1,500 frames for my 33 scenes of the film. All the tutorials that I watched on using Procreate in the beginning, I found were way too information-packed and overwhelming. So I decided to teach myself how to use the program through trial and error, which did hold me back in some ways, but I'm very proud of myself now that I have taught myself how to use the program, and I feel very accomplished and proud of the level of animation and movement I have achieved. My art style has changed a lot over the years, becoming more stylized and cartoonish. And although I usually love adding detail to my art, I knew my character design for the film had to be as simple as possible to make animating their movement easier. The character in my film is based off of me, but is not me. They are a fictional character. And something interesting about them is that their hair progressively grows throughout the film. And it symbolizes how much I changed after I shaved my head, and also how long personal growth takes. Some artists who inspired the film's art style are Ayata Kano, a Japanese painter, manga artist, and sci-fi essay writer. Her two-dimensional figures and her art challenge the ways young women are objectified in Japan's consumerist culture. Her often androgynous figures are sometimes partially or fully nude with enlarged eyes and heads. They float through alternative realities, expressing childlike wonder and playfulness, both qualities I wanted to convey in my character. My background design was very inspired by Thomas Sanchez, a Cuban painter known for his serene nature landscapes. The main animated films that inspired my projects are Nausicaa, The Valley of the Wind, and Princess Mononoke, created by Hayao Miyazaki from Studio Ghibli. I have adored these Studio Ghibli films since I was a child. I cannot express the love I have for them, and these two favorites of mine are especially amazing. Both films explore the disconnect between humans and nature and how beautiful the outcomes can be when the two live in harmony. Nausicaa is family friendly, and I highly recommend watching both of them. And of course, my main influence for the film are the beautiful places that surround me in our country. The Oberberg Mountains, which we went on a class trip to last year, the Wild Coast, the Tsitsikamma Forest, and my home, False Bay. All places that I've been privileged enough to spend time in. I have never really had religious beliefs, but I have begun to feel a great spiritual connection to nature, feeling interlinked to every plant and being on the planet through an all-encompassing force. And this project has been an exploration of my still-forming ideas of philosophy and philosophies of life, nature, and spirituality. This is my first major art project I have completed. I have poured my heart into it, and I'm so incredibly proud and satisfied with the outcome. This is only the beginning of my journey of art and expression, and I can't wait to complete more projects of the sort. I'm so grateful to the school for giving me the opportunity and environment to consistently work on and learn about something of completely my choice. And a special thank you to Michael and Zia Kingwell-Kluti for helping me create and produce the background song Soil. And Michael will hopefully be releasing the full version soon. Thank you to my parents for their constant emotional and financial support. And big thanks to my internal mentor, Mr. Stodel, for being so encouraging and insightful. And thanks to my external mentor, Richard Bolland, who couldn't be here tonight, from the Studio Bolland Animation Studios. He gave me critical planning advice and kept my very large ideas realistic. The film is quite fast and short, so if you would like to come see it again, it will be available at my store, as well as individual scenes and my planning. Thank you for coming. I hope you enjoy the film.
Forest is so overgrown. I sit me, my bones crack. Or is it just the branches of trees? This place, it certainly does not think of me.